Hi, Andrei. How is it going? How's life?
Hello, Francesco. I'm really good right now. Really happy to get involved into this podcast, especially after we done our first live on Instagram as well. So looking
Yeah,
forward to this.
it's a pleasure to have you here on the show. And I'm so happy as well to introduce today's topic. And of course, we are talking about calorie deficit, fat loss, metabolism, and in particular, we're going to focus on aggressive calorie deficit. Now, me and Andrei are evidence-based coaches, so you probably hear us very often talking about how important is to be flexible with your diet, with your approach to training and nutrition, so that you can be sustainable, because it's on the long term that you produce the best results, especially in terms of fat loss. And that's for most of the people. But there are some contexts, there is some place for an aggressive approach to dieting. So we are going to talk about that in particular. So I'd love to hear from you, Andrei, basically when we talk about metabolism, just in terms of what is it that somebody needs in terms of energy for to sustain his lifestyle. Now we know that we depend on food to survive, and we all know that we have different energy expenditure, we have different metabolism, we have different size and height and lifestyles. So when we talk about metabolism, we refer generally to the amount of energy that our body needs to sustain all the things we do in our life. And where in particular those calories come from? Why do we need a certain, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 calories? Would you like to kind of, introduce that a little bit?
Yes, definitely. So I think it's pretty important to divide this metabolism discussion in two main categories. We have the theoretical based category and then we have the practical one. And just starting by talking about the theoretical one, because that's where we have all the principles based on. The main element is resting metabolic rate, or something which is pretty similar with BMR, basal metabolic rate. And those are the number of calories that a person would need just to sustain simple daily, basically being alive, just to make it more simple, just being alive without considering any type of activity, breathing and being alive.
So let's say that I'm waking up and I stay in bed and I look at the ceiling all day. That would be pretty much what my body needs to stay alive that day.
Yeah, I think simplified, that would be pretty much it.
Okay, cool.
On top of that, obviously, that would be the main element. In literature, you'll find different terms for that. You have resting metabolic rate, which is a bit higher than basal metabolic rate. And I don't even want to go in detail about those elements because to an extent, they not going to matter that much. What's pretty important is that those elements, no matter that you talk about RMR or BMR, they will make about 70% of your daily expenditure. So just by being alive, basically, you burn the most of calories.
That's it.
Now, on top of that, we have obviously different other factors which will influence our energy expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, which I think is pretty important, and a lot of us are neglecting it in our daily routines, is non-exercise activity. Through non-exercise activity, energy expenditure is basically all the tasks that we do on a daily basis, but they don't involve structured activities.
Yeah.
So here we can talk about walking, we can talk about gardening, we can talk about any social events in which we will move in any form and type.
Yeah.
Now, there are other elements as well. We have thermic effect of food. Here we talk about the digestion of products, because when we eat, we consume energy in the same time just to be able to absorb those nutrients from the food. Here we can talk about macros, and probably we're going to get in details about this a bit later on how we can influence to an extent the thermic effect of food, but this is not as much adjustable as, for example, can be non-exercise activity or actually physical activity. When we talk about structured routine in terms of activity, we can talk about a training session in the gym, we can talk about playing football with some friends.
Yeah. Awesome. So when you say, I think it's, thanks for the explanation, it's very clear. And the I think the most interesting part as well, based on what you said, is that the basal metabolic rate make up to 70% of someone's energy expenditure, but it's not influenceable so much. We can't change it. Like people have the misconception that they are going to gain 1 kilo of muscle and they're going to burn so many more calories, but it's not reality. It's not how it works. And or they as well say, oh, I'm working out four times a week, so I'm burning more calories, but I'm not seeing a reduction in body fat or in weight. So when you said that, you know, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the NEAT, so those are all the activities that we do in the day that are not related to our workouts. So it could be like fidgeting, it could be, you know, just standing up often, or just the daily steps is a perfect indicator for that, because you're going to do some daily steps at the end of the day, whether you try or not. You're going to go to the loo, cooking, go to grocery. So I find it very interesting that lean people in general, they have a high non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Is not, they have a good metabolism, they have a good basal metabolic rate, but they are also active. And if you take another example, is like a engineer who sits all day, and a waiter. Well, they are going to have the engineer might even have a great genetic and have a super fast super high basal metabolic rate, but the waiter is gonna easily burn way more than the engineer. So I think it's an important distinction that we have to make, that when we talk metabolism and we say that someone has a fast metabolism or a high energy expenditure, it's not necessarily related to genetic, but most of the time it's down to the lifestyle. Would you agree on that, or would you say that as well the other part of the metabolism can be enhanced a lot?
Well, I think to 95%, I agree with you. We have those 5% in which we can talk about people which have, to an extent, similar types of daily routines. And to be honest, you see a massive difference in terms of how many calories one is to have to lose weight and the other one is to have to lose weight. And again, here we talk about, as you said, we talk about other elements, and probably muscle mass would be an element which will influence the overall outcome. But when we talk about strictly comparison to people with the same body composition, with the same height, weight, gender as well, we get to the same idea.
Yeah, and I cringe when people maybe tell me, oh, Francesco, yeah, you're gaining muscle, so you burn more calories. And if there is like, that might be like a whole list of reasons why I'm building muscle, or a list of benefits that are linked with a bigger body mass, bigger muscles that are not burning more calories, right? So, okay. Very interesting. And let's give an example of someone who needs 2,000 calories just to sustain the lifestyle. He's working out 3 times a week, sometimes with weights, sometimes with body weight, sometimes with classes, but it's like an hour of workout for 3 times a week. It's pretty active, not crazy active. It's not like like my dad is carrying, furniture up and down his client stairs for 12 hours a day. No, let's say that is someone who is pretty active in terms of steps, like he does 10,000 steps a day, but he stays seated as a job. So he needs 2,000 calories. So let's say that we want to drop body fat. What would you say is like a realistic amount of calories that person needs to lose weight in a sustainable and flexible way, so that he can enjoy a bit of social life, but that after 12 to 24 weeks, he will actually reach his fitness goals, his body composition goals?
So when we talk specifically about the number of calories, the usual reduction in calories in which we want to, we will see a difference. We talk about 300 to 500 calories, but again, that will be highly dependent on the person weight, for instance, because in some cases you might want to decide the calorie deficit depending on the percentage of the total calories in terms of maintenance, if that makes sense. So let's say if we have a maintenance, you said, of 2,000 calories, we might want to have a deficit of, let's say, 10%. So that will be 200 calories.
Yeah.
So we can take into account deficits depending on percentages. But the standard version is the one in which you just assume that 300 to 500 calories will do pretty much the job in the first phase.
Yeah.
But that again depends on body weight. As you said, if someone has 2,000 calories as the maintenance, it will be pretty easy to drop 500. They will still have 3 meals of 500 calories, which is decent. But when we talk about a female which has 45 kg, maybe 50 kg, and their maintenance is about 1400,
yeah,
it wouldn't be that smart to have a calorie deficit of 500. So in that type of scenarios, you might be able to take percentages rather than standard amounts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think like I'm aligned with your position. If let's say for simplicity, for the people who are listening, let's keep the example of someone who is eating 2000 calories, tracking food, and he's maintaining his weight. So that's his baseline. And based on what you said, if I can chip in, I think you gave right values, and you can always double check with your body weight, because the problem is that many people, they say, actually, I am in a calorie deficit for a week and I'm not losing weight. And it's like, okay, that is an example that you are not in a calorie deficit, okay? You think you are, but either there is a leak in the tracking or simply you're not moving enough for what you're eating, for your body type, height, and size and age. I think like if you just look at the body weight loss per week, depending on how much body fat you have at the beginning, you want to aim between 0.5 to 1.5 of percent of your body weight, of your starting body weight. So let's say you are 100 kilos, you want to lose between 500 grams and 1.5 kilos per week. The more body fat you have, the higher, the faster you can aim for in terms of weight loss. I think most people, they land between 0.5 and 1, unless you have a lot of body fat to start with, and then you can afford to lose it faster, but it's going to slow down anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty conservative. So let's say 2000 calories, let's say that you start creating a deficit of 500 calories a day. That doesn't mean that you eat 1500 calories. It might be that you eat 1800 calories and you burn 300 extra calories from more activity. Like if you move from doing 2000 steps to 8000 steps, well, that's a pretty big difference. I saw like many people progressing a lot in terms of fat loss, but just increasing 2000 steps a day, which was cool. Because yeah, walking more is what I call a low hanging fruit. It's like, honestly, I work seated on Monday doing all the check-ins with the people in the tight t-shirt transformation. And if I don't think about it, I do 100 steps. But if I have like a little reminder every 3 hours to stand up often, well, I walk in the room and at the end of the day, I do 8,000 steps, which is a pretty big difference. Let's say instead, so that would be conservative. Probably the person will not feel so hungry, will be a little hungry, but not so much to kind of interfere with the other things that are going on in that person's life. What would you say, just to start with, is instead an aggressive calorie deficit? What would be a good, like, aggressive deficit for someone who maintains his body weight at 2000 calories?
Again, so I would consider, once I'm moving towards more aggressive, I wouldn't consider as much number of calories, but percentages. Yes. So I would say 0.4 will be an aggressive type of deficit. So talking about 0.4, you just make 2000 calories times 0.4, and the result will be the number of calories, which I don't have a calculator for, to be honest.
It would be 400 calories if you were eating 1000 calories, and then so 800 calories for... Yeah. Okay, so yeah, if you've been tracking a little bit and you realize that you're eating like between 1500 and 2000 calories, you know how hard it is to eat 800 calories. And I think like on this side, especially us that we see the research, like we know that how important it is to be consistent with your approach, because you might even be good in doing like an extreme low calorie deficit, but if you think, for example, you're not tracking on Sunday, on one day, and you're eating back the calories, then you're not really in a 800 calories deficit, but you're more, like the deficit is smaller. And we tend to don't recommend that. So let's give a little bit of context. If there are cases, in your opinion, where you can prescribe, you can suggest someone to go really aggressive with this fat loss. And yeah, so we can help like people listening understand if it's something that would be valuable for them or if they should focus on a conservative approach.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the context. It's as simple as it is. It depends on the context, and we need to take into account different aspects. First is, what is the client desire? What do they want to achieve? Do they have a specific event that they want to prepare for? If someone comes to me and they say, in 3 months I have my wedding, I really want to lose this amount of weight, I want to look in this way, that will be one of the cases in which you settle a deadline. And in those type of scenarios, you know that is not something which you want to sustain for a long period of time. So it's going to be for a short period of time in which you can be a bit more aggressive, being aware of the fact that once you finish the aggressive phase, you're gonna have your deadline, what's called deadline, and after you're gonna have a stage in which you try to gradually get, depending on the stage where you got, gradually get back to a healthy level in terms of body composition, or try to maintain that and gradually increase the calories in a way that will allow you to make it sustainable. So first one would be the deadline. Do you have a deadline for it? Is it something specific that you want to get ready for? Are you a bodybuilder? Do you want to compete?
Guys, go back, listen to this again, make sure that you take notes, because this is very important, like multiphasic approach. You're not gonna do this forever. Don't start day one eating 800 calories a day and thinking that you have to do it for months and months and months. This is something that you're probably here for a very short period of time compared to someone who does a more conservative approach. So really like that, Andrei. Yeah, please keep going.
So obviously that will be the first aspect. Now, when we talk back to the context, even though some people have a background, there are some red flags which you need to address all the time. Because in some cases, it might be that your health is more important than the deadline that you set for yourself. So here we talk about psychological state. Being aggressive with your diet is going to be hard. It can result sometimes in, eating disorders. And that's something which happens nowadays as well. So if someone is not ready to go for those stages of aggressive dieting, it might be better off not going through at all and choose a sustainable approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree.
What do you think?
Yeah, totally agree. You don't want to sacrifice like your mental health for a body composition goal, or like the time with your family or other aspects of your business. Like you don't want that to affect your like the rest of your life to the extent where it becomes a problem. Okay, yeah, I totally agree on that too. And yeah, if I can actually add something, like I think there is, I can't remember the main researcher of the study, but there is a study that I remember. It was over a 6 months period of time where, and I'm so sorry if I'm moving my hands like an Italian, but there is a fly going around my head, very annoying. And basically they divided the people in different groups with different calorie deficit to show if a more aggressive deficit would produce better results. And the most interesting thing, was that the people in the study were eating about 900 calories a day, or like 890. And basically they would, compared to the other groups, they lost 15% of their initial body weight. So a person of 100 kilos would go down to 85 kilos and reducing body fat in only 10 to 11 weeks on average. After the 10 to 11 weeks, they reverted their diet back to maintenance, and they continue until the 6 months mark at the maintenance. And they still produce a better fat loss than the people with a higher calorie amount, so a smaller calorie deficit. I think what that tells us, it's that is possible, but as you say, is literally the less you eat, the faster you will lose weight. But that will come at a cost, like you said. the risk of rebound, it's even higher. And we have research to show that a more aggressive deficit will increase the risk that someone will gain back the weight straight after the diet is finished. So I totally agree with you when you say that, you shouldn't do that without knowing the benefit and the risk involved. So totally agree on you. Yeah.
Probably something you feel right now as well, or you're going to feel in the next couple of weeks because you have your photo shoot. But we often see those people which have went through an aggressive deficit, and they got to a stage where, they just finish a meal and they feel hungry. They eat 1-2 meals, and they because of those hormonal change, because of those biological fluctuations, because of those appetite signaling factors as well, and you basically get to a stage where you are not in a normal healthy level in terms of body composition, which is going to affect other factors. And if you don't know how to manage those elements, I think that's where a coach could be pretty helpful in helping you getting out of those stages.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, something very important that I like to repeat and to highlight for the people who are listening, because like when we say calorie deficit, you mentioned now adaptation, and you might read, like when you read about fat loss, like this metabolic adaptation during a fat loss phase, and it's nothing complicated. It's just like our body shutting down a little bit to preserve our mass. Our body likes to stay stable. There is something called homeostasis, which is our biochemical balance. And that is in terms as well of body weight. There is a range of weight where our body feels comfortable and healthy and safe, and a lot higher than that and a lot lower than that. So when you try to lose like 10, 15 kilos of weight, your body will not like it. And as you decrease the calorie intake, we see from the research that our energy expenditure goes down. But why our body is spending less energy? Well, because we are moving less without knowing. I'm sure that you, Andrei, met people that were like, I don't know why I always eat the same, but 10 years ago, I was 10 kilos lighter. And I do the same job. I always go to the gym 3 times. And those people, they miss a piece of the puzzle that is usually they don't track their activity. And slowly over the years, they were doing 20,000 steps, and then 15, and then 12 and 10. And now they're doing like 5. And so they're gaining weight. That's important to consider as well when we say deficit. You might just eat the same and move more, and you can create a deficit. Okay.
That's one of the elements which people which are getting older are struggling with. Yes. And a lot of people think about it as metabolism. A lot of people think about it as, I'm older, it's going to be harder for me to lose weight. Whereas if you look at the research, we cannot correlate those elements, but there is an association between the fact that once we get older, the level of activities will always decrease. And that's one of the main elements of people gaining weight and losing muscles while they are getting older.
Awesome. And totally. Those people, they're usually like more on the couch. When they say actually their metabolism is slower, but because they are moving less apart from their workouts. So that's something that is, I think, empowering, because you can change it. It's so easy to just think about it. Yeah. And if we can move on the aggressive calorie deficit side. So just to be like very clear, maybe we can like brainstorm a little bit what would be the main few pros of doing an aggressive deficit, and then we move on into the cons and who is it good for.
Well, you need to give me some time to think about it, because it's a very complex discussion. Whenever you get into an aggressive calorie deficit, there could be some pro factors in long term, but in the same time, aggressive calorie deficit is something which will put your body in a place of increased sensitivity from an immune response perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very hard to create a clear comparison in terms of a health perspective, because here we don't talk about body composition and fat levels only, but here we talk about immune system, here we talk about psychological state, all those elements which in the end will play a role in health. Yeah. When we talk specifically about body composition, I think if that answer the questions is people which are at a greater risk of developing cardiovascular issues, people with increased levels of fat percentage, those will initially benefit the most for an aggressive calorie deficit. But that again comes with side effects. So it's never one-sided and a one-sided story.
Yeah. Totally agree. And like if I need to pick up like a few benefits, like a few pros of doing an aggressive deficit, and to give a little bit of context, I'm doing an aggressive deficit this week. So until Thursday, I'm going to eat about 1,200 calories a day. I'm 90 kilos and 180 centimeters. So I have muscle. I've built probably around 15 to 20 kilos of muscle in the last 4 years. So I definitely feel the hunger. You know, it's, I would say in Italian, the blanket is short. And yeah, it's there are some issues with like the logistical side of it because you need to be organized. Like you don't just want to butcher down the calories. You also want to focus on protein because you want to preserve muscle mass. So you like when you go really low, like we're talking 1,200, but you were mentioning 800 calories. And we have people in the study where they were eating 890 calories. So it's possible, and it's really challenging though. You focus on eating a lot of protein, some healthy fats, not a lot though, and mainly vegetables. And I think the most interesting side of it is that you have fast progress. You want to lose body fat, and if you think that to lose a kilo of body fat, you need to create a deficit of 7,000 calories on average, or just roughly, well, if you create a 1,000 calorie deficit a day, you know, you lose a kilo a week. So that's pretty fast, and that's pretty motivating, like motivating in terms of consistency. So I would say that is one of the best benefit of it. We can also argue that since the total length of the diet is shorter, if your goal is to also build muscle and lose fat, let's say that on the long term, you just want to look better. You want to have more curves, less fat, more definition, more toned muscle. Well, you know, you're going to need time. You're going to need time to build muscle. And if you spend half of the year to lose fat and then only half of the year to build muscle, your progress is not going to be as fast. I mean, this is my argument, than doing, say, 10 months of building muscle and then 2 months of aggressive deficit. Now, I totally agree with you that there are some downsides. I mean, like, yeah, you can spend more time in the surplus, and yeah, the total duration of the diet is going to be inferior, but the downside probably exceed the benefit. So you need to be really careful if like to understand if it's something that is good for you, that you can actually do without any major consequences. So you mentioned something about the risk of rebound when you do an aggressive deficit. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So I think when it comes to that, a lot of people don't have the long-term vision of what it takes to go through an aggressive phase and then going back to gradually increasing back calories.
Yeah.
So the first element is patience and having long-term vision. It's not that much about the fact that we don't know how to control it. Is that we don't have the patience to go through all the stages. So no one will get through an aggressive phase and then they will just rebound for no reason. They will rebound because they don't have a plan in place, but they'll rebound because they don't have the patience to get back gradually. And I think that's the main element and the biggest problem we struggle with.
Yeah.
And in all those studies as well, is not like something which comes and is unexpected. You know, there are some biological factors which are changing within the body. You're going to feel much more hungry. It's going to be harder for you to control and to keep under control hungriness, appetite, and all the other factors. And by understanding emotionally and having the knowledge to deal with those elements will make it easier for you to be able to go through all those stages. But I think a lot of people rebound, as simple as it is, because they don't understand what it takes to go through all those stages and they don't have the patience to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so if you are listening, don't do that if you don't know how to revert your aggressive deficit back to maintenance, or slight surplus. So if you don't have a plan, you're just butchering down the calories and eating just chicken and vegetables. Don't do it and expect, or do it and expect to gain all the weight back in a very short period of time. So you need to be okay with that, because yeah, if you're prepared, then there is no surprise and you don't need to freak out. Yeah. Did you have in mind any other downside of it? I have only a few.
I really like the pro that you mentioned, and that's, I wanted to touch upon that again. I know I'm gonna just get back to it, but indeed, creating momentum, that's unbelievable in coaching. Once you get someone to build up that momentum and see progress on a weekly basis every 2 weeks, they will just get going, you know, and that's what's the most important aspect to an extent. So definitely that's a massive pro to an aggressive calorie deficit. I actually have about two clients at the moment which are going for an aggressive calorie deficit.
Yeah.
And they are coming to the check-ins and they're like, because I explained to them, you know, this is what we need to do. It's going to take, this is the plan. You have to see the long-term vision, and they see really good progress in a short period of time. And that for them is really motivating, as you said, and that makes them keep going. And that's to an extent what you need to do in order to get results, especially initially.
Yeah.
Now getting back to the against factors. Do you have anything that you want to share while I just put some thought into it? Because there are quite a few. And
yeah, well, I would say that in this period you're gonna feel crap. Like you're going to eat like half, or like if you were eating 2,000 calories, it's less than half than before. I mean, I was building muscle on over 3,000 calories a day, not crazy high, like compared to my size, but like I definitely feel it like I'm empty. I'm just eating like a little bird. So I think like you don't notice it straight away, but if you prolong it for at least a month, such aggressive deficit, you are going to notice a drop in what you can do at the gym. Like there's no way you're going to do a PR in that week. Your total work capacity will probably decrease a lot. You might gain a little bit of body weight strength just because you are a bit lighter. Yes. And then I would say, so like, don't try to any 1 rep max, any test, like just take it easy with your training, because you're trying to preserve body mass at the moment. Okay. You're probably doing this because you want to improve your body composition. So don't do silly things with your training. And I would say that as well, like if you have a past of binge eating and anorexia, or anyway, like eating disorder, don't do it because I think it's one of those techniques that for those kind of people will bring back the black and white mentality in regards to food. Like, okay, food is bad, so I'm gonna butcher it down, and really go very extreme until like the problem is fixed, and then I can live my life. And it doesn't work like that. You should be like, there shouldn't be any emotion involved with food. Like when you go very aggressive, food becomes a function, right? You just, in fact, should focus on the food that fill you up. And we can talk about that in a second. I think the other cons is as I said earlier, the practicality of it. So you end up eating very little. And that's something that people don't realize. They say, yeah, I want to do this. But then when they sit down, they don't remember what they said like a couple of hours before. So they sit down and they expect and they to eat like at least something. And they realize that 800 calories or 1,000 calories is very, very little food. So yeah, I think the practical side of it, of eating very little, it's a massive downside for most people.
yeah, and just to get back to it again, when we talk about performance, there are the results of performance as well. When you talk about risk of injuries and recovery is a big element, because it takes so much longer to recover after a session. Have clients which had to decrease their calories, and they are doing the same sessions, and they get back to me, and after 2-3 days they are like telling me, you know, I feel like I haven't recovered after the same session I was doing a couple of weeks ago, and I was fine after 24 hours. Now it takes me 72 hours and I still feel tired. So again, when we talk about recovery will be to an extent related to potential risk of injuries. We cannot predict injuries, but to an extent, when we talk about links between nutrition and risk of injury, that's a big element I'm interested in. And being cautious about how you perform, volume, intensity, that's going to be something really important. And when you think about the performance side of it, is definitely going to be a con.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you might struggle to sleep too, because perhaps you just feel hungry and you can't sleep anymore. Like that can happen. And then, you know, we know how important it is to keep sleep quality and quantity for health, body composition as well, and fat loss too. So you get a bad night's sleep, the day after you're going to feel pulled towards those cookies, and that's all right. But you will need a bit of discipline and willpower. Stuff that you don't necessarily need when you build like a sustainable approach to diet. You can just build a system and just execute it, and that's fine, because you take a longer approach, so you have more space for like an imperfect week. Okay. And who would you say, you mentioned something earlier, but I love like to get a bit of clarity on that. Who would you say is good for like aggressive deficit?
So again, so good in terms of we have to make the differences here. Good in terms of health, or good in terms of someone who prepares for a competition? Because if you talk about competition and bodybuilding levels, definitely is going to be good for someone who's going to get on the stage. When we talk about health, I think the people which are having currently increased level of body fat percentages might be able to see better progress in a short period of time, and they could create that momentum. Again, I think the gender factor can play an important role in this. So when it comes to my clients, I'm more confident, to be honest, with having an aggressive calorie deficit with males than to females, because when we talk about females, when we talk about menstrual cycle, things are getting a bit more complicated. And from that perspective, when we're comparing males to females, we talk about muscle composition, we talk about height, weight, all those aspects make the male structure to be to fit better an aggressive deficit, whereas when we talk about females, females tend to have smaller frames in terms of structure. We talked about hormonal fluctuations, and in a lot of cases, I wouldn't really recommend an aggressive calorie deficit for general population female, which is not interested at all in competing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. If someone, it's a woman, I would probably like not increase the calories in the menstrual cycle week or period, like those 10 days. And just because like the immune system is so lowered, and the mood as well is not great. So you don't want to have even another big stress like an aggressive deficit. If I can chip in, I think like as well, people with exactly like a high level of body fat who want to see some fast results. I think that's important. If you don't care about fast results, you don't need to do such an aggressive deficit, because that's pretty invasive, as we said a few times. And I would say as well, if you are someone who like to train, you like to as well look great, you want to improve the way you look and feel in your body, but you also care about your strength. Let's say that you are someone who who does CrossFit every week, and you have a community of friends you do CrossFit with, and you don't want to notice that now you can't keep up with the others. Now you have to drop 10 kilos on that snatch. And if you care about those things and you want to see improvement in this period of time, don't do an aggressive deficit, because you are going to feel shit. Okay, you're going to feel worse than you were feeling before. That's a massive thing. And then I think like if you are it's not good for you if you don't know how to revert this approach. If you have no experience with calorie counting, no experience with diet at all, it's a little bit of risk. Like you are doing something that is quite extreme. So I know how I will feel when I will eat more. I will not feel full. Even leading to the photo shoot, I plan to revert the calories back up, because I don't want to look skinny. I want to look toned and muscular and fit. So I'm going to eat more carbs the 3 days before leading to the photo shoot. Water and sodium. There is no extreme approach in that. There is just a little bit of a manipulation of those variables to improve body composition. But I will not feel satisfied from those 3 days, because I've been aggressive. and the aggressive approach mess up a little bit with your hormonal profile, in particular leptin and ghrelin, so that they are the hormones responsible for making you feel full after a meal and hungry before a meal. They are not signaling properly to the brain, so you basically don't feel don't feel full when you have stuff in the stomach, and you feel hungry when in fact you still have stuff in the stomach. So regardless of what you eat, you feel hungry. So I know that, I'm prepared, and I will know that it's okay. I ate a bowl of pasta and I'm still hungry, but that's fine. It's gonna change with the time.
And here, just again, because you mentioned body composition, I think that's another element which has to be taken into account is body composition. It's as simple as it is. When we talk about someone who's been through an injury and the person shows increased levels of atrophy, for example, muscle waste, it wouldn't be pretty smart to get in an aggressive calorie deficit, because what's going to do that aggressive calorie deficit is going to increase how much fat-free mass you lose. So here we talk about muscle. So here we talk about people which already don't have an increased level of muscle mass. When you get yourself into an aggressive calorie deficit, you're going to lose much more muscle. Just to give you a simple example, hypothetically, when you have a conservative weight loss deficit, you will lose about at least 0.3 out of a kilogram of muscle. So that would be on each kilogram lost, you potentially lose about 300 grams of muscles. Yes. So when you increase that deficit, especially if you're coming after an injury and you have some levels of atrophy, that will just increase how much muscle you lose. So that's again one case in which you have to be pretty careful about deciding on an aggressive deficit.
I totally agree on that, and that's very powerful for the people who are listening, because if you think to just start with an aggressive deficit, expect to lose some mass, okay? Now, if you are an athlete, like someone with interest in bodybuilding or powerlifting, and you are training like for 11 months a year to build muscle, and now you do a month of calorie deficit aggressively, like the benefit of that month and the fact that you have 11 months on your shoulder of building muscle will probably be counterbalanced, and you'll still have more muscle than you would otherwise. But it's something very powerful. If you don't train at all, expect to lose the muscle that you already have. Yeah, absolutely.
And the problem with this is not going to be sustainable. So if you think about someone who doesn't train at all and goes for an aggressive, like genuinely, I wouldn't advise anyone that is not training at all to go for an aggressive calorie deficit, because unless you have a coach, when you can obviously again reverse that very carefully. Yeah. When you don't train and you go for an aggressive phase, you don't have, besides talking about that basal metabolic rate, resting metabolic rate, you don't have anything else to compensate. So if you don't increase your non-exercise activity, if you don't train, when you get to a stage where you are happy with your body weight due to the aggressive calorie deficit, you're going to rebound through the fact that you're going to try to reduce that calorie deficit, but you don't have other factors to compensate through the fact that you are now trying to eat more. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It does make sense. And maybe we can give some basic idea of how long we should do it for if we decide to go for an aggressive deficit. What would you say is a realistic time frame, or even if it's not in terms of days or months, maybe in relation to the body weight drop?
Yeah, so I think taking each context individually is the best option. So just having the coach or yourself to look at some biological weekly markers, looking at your psychological state, looking at the progress as well. How do you feel? Hunger levels, all these elements through which a simple check-in will do the job, just analyzing some weekly markers. And when you see those markers dropping, that's the point where you might know that you need to do a change. Because it's really hard to identify those factors if you are looking only on the superficial side of it, only on body images, for example, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think so if we can give a little bit of context, the people in the research I was referring to, if I don't recall wrong, they lost a total of 15% of their initial body weight in a period of 8 to 11 weeks. Before I said 10 to 11, but if I think properly, I think it's an average of 8 to 11 weeks because everyone lost weight with slightly different rates. So that's 15% of your body weight. So that's basically a man of 100 kilos. It's 15 kilos in 10 weeks, 11 weeks maximum. So yeah, we are talking, and then they reverted back to maintenance. So they were in deficit for only maximum of 10 weeks. Some people as little as 8 weeks. So they died for 2 months and they lost 15 kilos, which is pretty significant. The people in the tight t-shirt transformation with a more conservative approach, they lose between 5 to 10 kilos in a period of 12 weeks. But of course, everyone have different initial level of body fat, which is very important to say. I think you can aim for at least a 1% drop of your body weight per week. And you can do it for at least 4 weeks. Like I'm doing it for only a couple of 2 weeks. And the last week was less aggressive. This week is really aggressive. It's more of a peak week strategy. Mm-hmm. But I think you don't want to lose 20 kilos in a month or 30 kilos in 2 months. That's way too much. So I think if you achieve a 15% reduction of your initial body weight, you can then have a look at the picture before and after, check how you feel, check if, as you said, there are major downside in your life. Maybe you don't sleep anymore. Maybe you feel, you have arguments every day with everyone and you hate the world. And, that those are pretty, or maybe your joints feel bad, you don't recover from your training, you feel very slow. You notice all those, your energy during the day is lower. You don't feel motivated to train and diet anymore. So those are pretty clear sign that if you take the metaphor of an elastic band and you're pulling it, as you create a deficit, you go farther from the center. But the longer you deficit, the longer you stretch the band and the more your body wants to be back at the initial situation. So not necessarily doing it for a long period of time is better. Actually, the more you do it, the more you will want to gain all the weight back. So I think it's something definitely achievable, 15% of your body weight, and then assess the situation. You can ask for a feedback. I mean, me and you, Andrei, we're always happy to give free feedback. I have a free Facebook group, one for Italian, one for English. It's called the Lean Muscle Warriors. You can find it on Facebook, and it's a free private group. So there you can ask me questions. I do lives, I do weekly posts. And you can send me your picture and I can give you an opinion if based on what is your progress, I can tell you if you should continue or if it's better to revert and go back to maintenance and surplus. And feel free to give a follow to Andrei. Andrei, do you want to remind us your username on Instagram?
You can find me on my Instagram on AAS Physical. And you can find me on Facebook as well, Andrei. That's going to be harder for you to write it down unless you are Romanian. So just stick with the Instagram.
We're going to drop that your username in the show notes. Andrei, before we wrap it up, I think we can just give a little bit more content about training. So the training side. What should we change it? Should we do something different? Should we avoid something in particular? I mentioned something about training earlier, but I'd love to hear your feedback about it.
Okay, so when it comes to training, I think when we're looking on what people in this industry are doing, and recently what we see is that people will tend to prioritize strength over volume. So in a lot of cases, you just, as you go with aggressive deficit, you try to decrease the volume. So if you're doing, for example, 4 sets, 3-4 sets on one exercise, once you go through an aggressive deficit and you find out that it takes longer to recover, you'll just try to maintain the weight and your strength levels as much as you can, but you'll decrease the volume so you can get to 1-2 sets per session, and I think that will be just fine. Mm-hmm. In terms of people out there which are not competing, it's pretty important to take into account what other activities you are involved in. Just a simple thing to take into account: if your sport involves more contact or it involves more technical points, you to an extent, you'll have to be careful with the way you train because the risk of injury will be increased. If you talk about contact sport, you'll be more prone to injury. If we talk about being involved in Olympic weightlifting, it's going to be much harder for you to perform all those technical points due to the fact that you are in a caloric deficit, which is aggressive. You're not going to have the same levels of concentration. You're going to feel weak. You're not going to have the mental capacity to emphasize and concentrate on all those elements. When it comes to cardiovascular training, I think it really depends on each case. So I have cases in which I did the opposite. So in some cases, because the calorie deficit was aggressive, I decreased the cardio training just because I wanted those clients to be able to recover better after the resistance training sessions. And in some other cases, in which someone has a really important deadline, you might even increase the levels of cardiovascular training just to be able to increase a bit that deficit in those last stages before an event.
I totally agree on that, and especially on the part of actually reduction in terms of volume. So the one thing I would suggest, trying to be oversimplifying, is to stay away from failure. Stay away from like a massive disruption in your training. Like if you were training hard before, you don't want to train as hard and like as much as before, just because your ability to recover, it's lower. Okay, so you can even ask more from your body and keep training the same way, but your recovery will be lower. So you will struggle to keep up with your usual workouts. That is something that is not straight away. Like you might be able to do it for like a month, and then you notice that you're particularly tired. So maybe like the effect of that comes later. But apart from that, I think like this is an area where people overthink that because most of the people, they don't train as hard to like accumulate so much fatigue, and probably their body can do more than they think. Whether if you're working with like an high level athlete, you want to, or like just like a competitive athlete, so people who try to get closer to their limit, like their physical and their performance limit a little bit more, then you want to be more careful with that for sure. But in that case, I wouldn't prescribe an aggressive deficit. Unless it's like a combat sport, maybe like where they have to make a weight class. Okay, then in that case, I can expect a short reduction in performance, but I probably am able to revert it back or maybe like test it before.
That's where it becomes really interesting because we don't talk about body fat composition only. We talk about glucose composition, we talk about sodium, and in those sports it becomes really interesting on the way you actually have to take into account all the other factors. I was recently listening to a podcast to someone who does this as a profession, helps UFC fighters to just get within the weight for a fight, and is just unbelievable to see the options and the way they adjust their weight for sodium levels through glucose, which are stored within the muscles as well. So remember that the idea is that not every loss in weight is due to you dropping body fat percentage. They were mentioning something which is called non-essential body weight. I think that's the way they were mentioning it. I can't remember the name. So non-essential body weight, we don't talk about body fat, fat-free mass. We talk about those other chemical reactions which happen within the body, which to an extent influence your weight quite a lot. And when we talk about, as you said, someone who's a boxer or a UFC fighter, someone who needs to get to a specific weight, they see fluctuations of 5-6 kilograms per day, which is like morning to evening, which is wow.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Crazy. And what's the name of the podcast? Do you want to share that with us?
Okay, so because I just mentioned the podcast was from James Smith, and he had a guest on the podcast probably one of the last few, and yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, and you might want to have a listen of that one as well.
Yeah, James Smith, if I'm not wrong, it's about it's for people who are like generally interested in fitness and improving their strength and body composition. So I think it's very similar to what we do in this podcast. If I'm not wrong, I am not listening to that podcast in particular.
I think what they do is more life-based. So here we still talk a bit more about aesthetic side of it, bodybuilding, resistance training, whereas that one is more over lots of other fields within the sport. They talk about any other sports, jiu-jitsu and football and so on.
Okay. Cool. So, Andrei, would you say that, in regards to this aggressive deficit, should we change the way we eat? Should we focus on particular foods? Again, we touched upon that, but so we can give some clear guidelines.
So, again, when we get into an aggressive calorie deficit, the food choices will be more and more important. When you have less calories, you need to focus more on volume foods, obviously, because you want to keep your hunger levels under control. You want to keep yourself as full as you possibly can. And often we try to do that through getting the food options which are the least dense in calories with the highest volume. So whenever you look on your product, what's the most important element that you take into account is not actually the number of calories, but the number of calories per 100 grams, let's say. And that's the first element that you want to look into if you have a product and you want to get yourself into an aggressive calorie deficit. In a lot of cases, I found people that they look on a pack and they see, oh, that's not much, that's 100 calories. Well, but what's the amount of that product? Because that's going to make the most impact at the end when we talk about an aggressive calorie deficit.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Totally agree on what you just said. And Andrei is referring to the energy density of food. And I think like understanding the difference between an energy dense food and a less energy dense food and a more nutrient dense and less palatable and more volumetric food, it's probably one of the most important skills to have for someone who wants to lose fat on command. Like if you don't understand this difference and you don't understand the difference between a banana and watermelon, you are actually either relying on MyFitnessPal a lot or relying on a coach or a nutritionist who will tell you what to do, but you will never really be independent when it comes to food choices. So in particular of this example, if you take like candies and chicken, you can take 100 calories of chicken and 100 calories of candies, and they will both be 100 calories, but you will probably notice very clearly that by eating the chicken, the 100 calories from chicken, you will feel more satisfied and full than eating the candies. Now people will say, oh no, actually I'm feeling more